The day I died was the day my fiancé was to be married. In a dilapidated temple on the outskirts of the city, I lay bleeding from 7 wounds, propped up on a straw mat, weeping before the dust-covered statue of Guanyin. As a devout believer, I have never done anything to shame heaven or earth. Why, then, have I been abandoned by all who once loved me? Guanyin remained silent, but looked upon me with compassion. The sound of hurried horse hoofs echoed outside the door. Who was it, shivering with cold, approaching me? My eyes were already blind, and I gazed helplessly in his direction, pleading in a hoarse voice, "Whoever you are, please bury my body. In my next life, I will surely repay you." He trembled as he embraced me, a single tear falling onto my forehead. On that night of the first snow, the cold was biting. The beloved granddaughter of the loyal and brave Marquis had died in the wilderness at the age of 16. Chapter 1. When I was 6 years old, I accompanied my grandmother to worship the Buddha. At that time, I was still young and had just entered the Buddhist temple, with no sense of reverence. Looking at the massive golden Buddha statue, I did not kneel or bow, but instead tilted my head and smiled. It was as if an old friend had returned. The old abbot looked at me for a long time and said that in my previous life, I was a small candle flame before the Buddha. My worldly ties were shallow, but my connection with the Buddha was deep, and I was of the highest nobility. At the time, I was too innocent to understand that such a propitious omen actually harbored endless suffering. Separation in life, death in a dilapidated temple. Looking back, 10 years passed like a dream, every event seeming to fulfill that prophecy. Shallow karmic ties with the world, deep karmic ties with the Buddha. Only the words noble and pure were likely a mistake by the old abbot. A girl who died in the mud, where was her nobility and purity? But when I opened my eyes again, there was no snow or wind, no Guanyin. Time had reversed back to the spring of my 14th year. The Zhongyu Marquis mansion was prosperous and grand, and my childhood sweetheart was deeply devoted. Only a new red mole on my forehead seemed to remind me. On that snowy night in the dilapidated temple, the next life I promised to that man, the Buddha has granted me. At 14, the young granddaughter of the loyal and brave Marquis did 3 things. On a spring night, I entered my grandfather's study. I begged my grandfather to be wary of an inconspicuous official in the army. A year later, that lowly official would defect to the enemy, fabricate evidence, and frame my grandfather for treason, nailing him to the pillar of shame. My grandmother, overcome by grief and anger, would die on the carriage en route to the palace to plead for my grandfather's life. The moonlight was like water, and my grandfather stared at me for a long time. He did not ask me how I knew the name of that lowly official, nor was he surprised by my extensive knowledge of court affairs. He only asked, "I heard you had a nightmare last night. Are you feeling better now?" The candle flame flickered, casting a dim, shadowy light. My grandfather smiled as he always had, not like the cold, pale figure in the coffin. I lowered my eyelashes, nearly shedding tears. In summer, I frequently visited the Jingwa temple. The Empress Dowager was deeply devoted to Buddhism and had brought a statue of Guanyin from the temple back to the palace. She lacked a noble woman of high birth to recite the Lotus Sutra for her. That task would fall to the 9th princess in half a year. And the 9th princess, favored by the Empress Dowager, would seize my marriage and exile me to the temple without hesitation. But now, faced with the Empress Dowager's inquiry, the abbot recommended me. Who else, reincarnated as the candle flame before the Buddha, could be more suited to recite the sutras? In late autumn, I went to see Pei Shu. Since I awoke in spring, I had repeatedly refused his requests to meet. When the elders of our 2 families met at a banquet and mentioned the engagement, my grandmother merely smiled. Childhood jokes, how could they be taken seriously? The proper and courteous young man could not help but write to me. Ruosi. What have I done wrong? And now, amidst the falling autumn leaves, he asks the same question. Ruosi. What have I done wrong? Counting both this life and the previous one, we have not seen each other for nearly 2 years. The young man's hair was as sharp as a knife. His eyes as black as ink. Truly elegant. No wonder the 9th princess fell deeply in love with him at first sight. Even willing to bear the weight of a life on her shoulders to be with him. But Pei Lang, you have been close to me since childhood. How could you not know that if you were to utter a single word of separation, I would never cling to you? I am waiting for your true words. You should not remain silent in my tears. Your silence is indulgence toward the 9th princess and a knife piercing my heart. You have your bright future. And I have my honor and dignity. But you have never considered me. As the sun sets in the west, weary birds return to their nests. The afterglow of the sunset fell on the young man's shoulders, making him appear especially tall and handsome. I looked up at him with a smile. Pei Lang, do you love me? The young man paused, then whispered, Ruosi. I. You love me, I said. Pei Shu's ears turned red, and he awkwardly looked away. But I continued. You love me because I am the sole heir of the loyal and brave marquis. You love me because I am the candle flame before the Buddha, renowned throughout the land. You love me because I am the one chosen by the Empress Dowager to serve under Guanyin. You love me in so many ways. I paused briefly, then spoke the answer that had been on my lips for 1,000 times. But you alone do not love me. Song Ruosi. Pei Shu's face turned pale in an instant, and I felt only sadness. Pei Lang, you will never love anyone in this life. You only love yourself. After a long stare, Pei Shu left, looking dazed and disoriented. He still wore his white robe with grace, but his steps were unsteady. I stood under the corridor, silently watching him leave. Pei Lang, once someone saw you as their lifelong companion, imagining growing old with you and having children and grandchildren. But that girl died in the winter of her 16th year, and her heart froze solid. I closed my eyes gently. A tear slid down the corner of my eye, eventually disappearing without a trace. That day, it snowed heavily. The palace maid brought me a fox fur robe early, saying it was a gift from the Empress Dowager, telling me not to catch a cold. Turning down a small path, I came to the Buddhist hall. Before the Buddha hall, a young man was kneeling, dressed not very warmly, with snow already covering his shoulders. I looked at him for a moment longer, and the young man seemed to notice, turning his gaze toward me. He was truly handsome, with deep-set eyes and a gaze as cold as stars. The palace maid whispered to me, Miss, do not get involved with the 5th prince. He is marked by misfortune, and his future is bleak. It was him, the 5th prince, Gu Jiuyuan. It was said that on the day he was born, there was an unusual celestial phenomenon, a white rainbow pierced the sun. A white rainbow piercing the sun signifies that the emperor's fortune has been stolen. An ominous sign. Therefore, the emperor disliked the sun and had ignored him for years, almost abandoning him. I withdrew my gaze, held up my umbrella, and continued on my way. In this new life, I cannot afford the slightest mistake. Gu Jiuyuan is pitiful, but he does not deserve my pity. Yet as we passed each other, the wind carried a familiar scent. I stopped in disbelief. The cold wind rustled his sleeves, and the young man stared at me expressionlessly. Without thinking, I reached out my hand. You. He furrowed his brows, turned his head away, avoiding my hand, his eyes filled with caution and confusion. I stood there in silence for a long time, as if waking from a dream, and whispered, I'm sorry. The snow continued to fall, and I forced myself to keep walking forward. A palace maid asked me in confusion. What happened to you just now? Are you acquainted with the fifth prince? Between Gu Zhou and me, in this life and the last, we had only met twice. Once was just now. The other was when I was on the brink of death. At that time, I was bleeding from 7 orifices. And he held me in his arms. I heard his choked breathing and smelled the cool scent of snow pine on his robe. As I gasped for breath, I begged him to bury me. He shed tears, which fell on my forehead, forming a new red mole. That night, he whispered that he had come too late. I thought he was my old friend. But now I realize that back then, I didn't even know him. Songruosi and Gu Zhou had no connection in their previous lives. In the Buddhist hall, the charcoal fire burned brightly. The Empress Dowager knelt on the mat, her mind focused and calm. I knelt beside her, reciting Buddhist scriptures. Cultivate Buddhist wisdom. Possess great supernatural powers. Understand all the doors of the Dharma. Be sincere and without deceit. And have a firm resolve. Such is the Bodhisattva, filling the land. An hour earlier, a palace maid had secretly told me that Gu Zhou's mother was dying, and he had come to seek medical help for her. But the Empress Dowager did not wish to intervene. The Empress Dowager had 6 grandsons and 11 granddaughters. If one were to count the children of the princes outside the palace, there might be dozens of children calling her grandmother. Among them, there were those who were naturally intelligent and charming, and those who were skilled at reading people's expressions. However, Gu Zhou had a cold and stubborn personality, and he bore the ominous sign of a white rainbow piercing the sun. He had never won the Empress Dowager's favor. It was only natural that the Empress Dowager did not want to help him. But I wanted to help him. Because in my previous life, I had promised that if there was a next life, I would repay him. In the Buddha hall, before the statue of the Bodhisattva, I did not want to be a person who broke her promise. Outside the door, the snow fell heavier and heavier. The north wind howled, and the window frames rattled loudly. The figure kneeling outside, seemingly exhausted, swayed slightly. My recitation of the sutras paused involuntarily. The Empress Dowager seemed to notice and looked at me. Are you tired? Take a rest. She rose slowly, and I hurried to support her. The Empress Dowager touched my face and said, "The Emperor went hunting in winter and caught a deer, which he gave to me. You've been eating vegetarian food for so long to accompany me. Go home early today, and I'll have the imperial chef roast some venison for you." I glanced out the window and finally couldn't help but speak up. The 5th prince has been kneeling outside for almost half a day. The Empress Dowager glanced at him indifferently and called for Aunt Lan Ting. Let him go back. I left with Aunt Lan Ting. The wind and snow were so fierce that I could barely keep my eyes open. Gu Zhou was still kneeling in the snow, his body stiff, looking like a snowman. Aunt Lan Ting said sternly, "The Empress Dowager requests that the 5th prince return." He did not stand up, his voice hoarse, repeating the same words, "My mother is gravely ill, and her life hangs by a thread. Please have mercy and summon the imperial physician." Aunt Lan Ting repeated, "Please return, 5th prince." Gu Zhou bowed his head deeply, his face flickering with despair, and asked slowly, one word at a time, "My mother has always been kind. The greatest mistake of her life was giving birth to me. If I die, can she be saved?" The young man had nothing of value, and the most precious thing he could offer to save his mother was his own life. Snow fell heavily, and the air was still. Aunt Lan Ting remained silent for a long time, her eyes filled with pity. After a while, she said softly, "5th prince, the accounts in the palace are not settled in such a simple manner." In the wind and snow, the young man closed his eyes briefly and tugged at the corners of his mouth. It was a smile that was almost pitiful. Then he no longer pleaded. using his hands to push against the snow, struggling to stand up. He had been kneeling for too long, and his knees had long since stiffened. He managed to stand up, but nearly fell again. I dropped my umbrella and reached out to support him, blurting out, "Let me take you." The young man's wrist was almost cold to the touch, sending a chill down my spine. Gu Zhuoyuan quickly withdrew his hand, his eyelashes covered in snow, his tone as cold as the snow. "Thank you, Miss Song. I can walk on my own." I didn't get angry, only saying, "I'm going your way. I'm not going out of my way to send you." Lady Lanting personally picked up the oil paper umbrella and handed it to me, as if she wanted to say something. I took it and spoke first. "Auntie, remember to stew some loquat and pear soup for the Empress Dowager tonight. It's too cold tonight, and her throat ailment will flare up tomorrow." Lady Lanting quietly watched me for a moment, then nodded kindly. "You're thoughtful, Miss Song. The snowy roads are slippery, be careful where you step, or you might fall." Her words carried hidden meaning. I understood, and Gu Zhuoyuan understood even more. As soon as we stepped out of the palace gates, he spoke indifferently. "Miss Song, please return." I only said, "We really are going the same way." The young man stared straight ahead, his voice hoarse and weary. "I know that the Bodhi Pavilion and the Qixia Palace are in opposite directions." I was surprised by his knowledge of me, but upon reflection, it made sense. As the most favored noblewoman of the Empress Dowager, even if he had no intention of befriending her, he would have heard of her. I thought for a moment and said, "I know a little bit of medicine." "Do you know that?" Gu Zhuoyuan suddenly looked up at me, in those eyes as cold as stars. My reflection was clearly visible. It was as if a traveler who had wandered in the darkness for too long had finally caught a glimpse of light. He finally let down his guard. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I only tilted my head and smiled. "Prince Wu, please lead the way." Qixia Palace had fallen out of favor for years, and even the palace walls had faded. Charcoal was scarce here, and though the doors and windows were tightly shut, little warmth could be felt. In the vast palace, not a single palace maid was to be seen. Lin Fei lay on the bed, covered in layer upon layer of blankets, her palms still ice-cold. For some reason, I recalled the scene of my own death. Just as cold and empty, just as lonely and despairing. But back then, Gu Zhuoyuan had arrived. Now, Gu Zhuoyuan and I had arrived together, taking her pulse. I was really just a novice. Years ago, my grandmother fell ill, and I had followed the doctors around, learning the basics. Lin Fei's pulse was weak and, with a sensation like rolling pearls. It was a chronic illness, but there was also a fierce new ailment. Lin Fei had woken up at some point, her face swollen and pale, her dark eyes staring straight at me. Gu Zhuoyuan knelt down and whispered, "Mother, this is..." He paused suddenly, as if unsure how to introduce me. I continued, "I am a female physician, here to diagnose the noble lady." Lin Fei grasped my hand and said in a pitiful voice, "I knew it. The Emperor hasn't forgotten me." Her face, ravaged by illness and suffering, revealed a hint of innocence reminiscent of a young girl when she mentioned the Emperor. Gu Zhuoyuan turned away, and I noticed a trace of pain in his eyes. I gently patted Lin Fei's hand and comforted her. "The Emperor has instructed you to rest well and take your medicine. Once you recover, he will come to see you." Lin Fei mumbled something indistinctly and fell into a deep sleep. In the corridor, the cold wind cut like a knife. Lin Fei's pulse lingered in my heart, and I didn't know how to speak. Gu Zhuoyuan seemed to see through me and said calmly, "Miss Song, feel free to speak." I sighed softly. Lady Lin's body. I fear she may not survive this winter. Gu Zhuoyuan closed his eyes for a moment, then said after a long pause. For her. It is also a form of liberation. The candle flame flickered dimly, casting the shadow of the young man on the ground, fragile and lonely. I couldn't help but ask, "What about you?" He looked at me, his dark eyes filled with confusion. Me? I suppressed the bitterness in my heart and asked, "If the last person in the world who cares about you were to leave, what would you do?" He froze for a moment before saying softly, "What was before will be before, and what will be after." I shook my head. "I fear you have no choice in the matter. As one grows older, any prince with a chance to inherit the throne is inevitably drawn into power struggles. Whether he fights or not, the humiliation and suffering he has endured in the past will only intensify in the future. Even his life may be in danger." Gu Zhuyuan seemed to understand my words and fell into a long silence. He laughed bitterly. "But Miss Song, a person like me has always been powerless to control my own fate." A breeze blew, extinguishing the candle flame. The surroundings grew dim and obscure. Gu Zhuyuan rose to fetch a lighter, but I pulled him back by his sleeve. The young man turned to look at me. A sliver of moonlight filtered through the window, casting a tender glow on his features. His dark eyes held both inquiry and resistance. Yet he did not release my hand. I heard my own voice. "Gu Zhuyuan, do you have any wishes?" Calling him by his given name was so disrespectful. But he didn't seem to mind. Just smiled, something that can't be fulfilled. I didn't let go. Stubbornly looking at him, "Say it. Maybe it could come true." He shook his head, "Forget it." He took a step forward, but I refused to let go. Falling awkwardly to the ground, Gu Zhuyuan paused, bending down to pull me up, but I refused to get up. I gripped his hand, persistently asking, "You're only 16. You shouldn't be living like an old man. You must have your own wishes. If you won't tell me, who will help you fulfill them?" The young man, driven to the brink of despair, finally revealed a hint of his true nature. "I want the white rainbow to pierce the sky as an auspicious sign. I want the Qixia Palace to truly bathe in sunlight and clouds. I want this world to kneel at my feet, Miss Song. Who can help me achieve this?" "You?" His words echoed through the empty courtyard. Gu Zhuyuan's eyes seemed to burn with flames, his breath sharp as a blood-stained sword. But the next moment, he looked at me and smiled coldly. "Miss Song, if you came here to test my true feelings, you can go back and report now. But my true feelings aren't worth anything." It turned out he still believed I had ulterior motives toward him. Yes. He was a young wolf cub who had endured nothing but coldness. When he encountered warmth, he only suspected there was a trap, never believing it was genuine. I took a deep breath, grabbed his wrist, and looked up at him. It was a posture of admiration. And even before the Buddha, I had never been so devout. "Gu Zhuyuan, whether you believe it or not, I'm here to help you fulfill your wish." The young man narrowed his eyes, suddenly bent down, and stared into mine. It was like an examination, like an inquiry. The cool scent of cedar on his collar overwhelmed my senses, leaving me immersed in his pitch-black eyes, repeatedly recalling the final moments of my life. Do you know how lonely and despairing that was? When everyone had abandoned me, only you, a stranger to me, came to see me. I didn't know what kind of connection we had before that, and I was destined never to find out. But Gu Zhuyuan, I promised you that if there was a next life, I would repay you. And now, this is my new beginning. The wind and snow had just stopped, and all was silent. The young man reached out his hand in confusion and wiped away my tears. Only then did I realize that I had been crying. He remained silent for a moment, then looked at me earnestly and said softly, "Miss Song, I have nothing to repay you with." I exhaled gently and told him sincerely, Gu Zhou, you have already repaid me. When you didn't know it. Winter passed and spring came. Miss Song of the Bodhi Cottage met many people and did many things. When the weather turned bitterly cold, Miss Song naturally caught a cold. The Imperial Hospital immediately sent its best female physician to treat her. But upon arrival, the physician was instead summoned to attend to the disgraced Empress Lin. To treat Empress Lin, the finest herbs were required. Miss Song then brought out her personal belongings and asked the physician to use them freely for the medicine. Deer antler, ginseng, snow lotus. Whatever the physician requested, Miss Song did not hesitate for a moment. Miss Song knew how to handle people. She gave the female physician clothes and jewelry, and sent someone to her hometown in Wuxi to visit her parents and younger brother, bringing them New Year's money. With such a combination of kindness and authority, the female physician came and went, only speaking of Miss Song's illness and never mentioning Lin Fei once. On the other side, the people at the loyal and brave Marquis mansion were busy purchasing ancient texts and polishing weapons. Their master had served the country loyally, leaving only the old Marquis and his wife, along with a young granddaughter. The young granddaughter had once been devoted to reciting Buddhist scriptures, but lately she seemed to have awakened some martial arts blood in her veins. She loved reading military strategies and practicing swordplay. The loyal and brave Marquis and his wife would only smile when they mentioned her, saying that she had been spoiled since childhood and there was nothing they could do but indulge her. In the back courtyard of the loyal and brave Marquis mansion, the one holding a scroll or a sword was not Miss Song, but a young man. The young man had lived in seclusion for years and was long forgotten. So when he emerged, everyone assumed he was a distant relative of the Song family, never suspecting his connection to the ominous figure known as White Rainbow piercing the sun within the imperial palace. These matters were unknown to others, but my grandfather and grandmother were well aware of them. I had been waiting for them to call me over to ask questions, but what came instead was my grandmother packing precious herbs for me. And my grandfather, for no apparent reason, went to the backyard to personally instruct Gu Zhou in martial arts. My confusion was not lost on my grandfather and grandmother. One early spring evening, they casually mentioned past events while chatting with me. Gu Zhou had spent many years in the palace, unloved and unknown. Many had forgotten that his mother also came from a military family. Before entering the palace, Lady Lin was a rare female general in the capital. Before the ominous sign of the white rainbow piercing the sun, the Qixia Palace housed many military secrets that were not passed down to outsiders. Those were the gifts prepared by Lady Lin's father for his young grandson. He hoped that one day his grandson would become a great general, fighting on the battlefield and charging across the plains on horseback. However, a single prophecy from the Astronomical Bureau shattered the future of this family. Her grandmother said softly, "A white rainbow piercing the sun may foretell the overthrow of an emperor, but it may also foretell the birth of a hero." Do you know why the Imperial Astronomical Bureau chose such an ominous sign? When Gu Zhou was born, the imperial harem was engulfed in intense rivalry. Lin Fei's father was away at war, having achieved numerous military exploits. As a result, Lin Fei often received the emperor's favor and was showered with love. That year, she and Yu Fei both became pregnant. Everyone said that if Lin Fei gave birth to a prince, the crown prince's position would likely go to her child. However, Yu Fei's maternal grandfather was the head of the Imperial Astronomical Bureau. Later, Yu Fei gave birth to the fourth prince. Then the Imperial Astronomical Bureau declared that the fifth prince was an inauspicious person. Yu Fei's daughter was the ninth princess. They, mother and daughter, had always been adept at using such tactics. My grandmother saw that I had come to understand, and smiled as she stroked my head. The fifth prince is a man of deep loyalty and righteousness. If you help him, he will remember your kindness. With that, I can rest assured. I promised Gu Zhou that I would create an opportunity for him to present himself before the emperor in a proper manner. Whether he can seize this opportunity will depend on him alone. Day after day, month after month, I continued to recite sutras daily in the Buddhist hall of Shokong Palace. Meanwhile, Guju Yuan had settled in the backyard of my home, studying swordsmanship by lamplight. During his days in the cold palace, he had already studied military strategy extensively. What he lacked was a master teacher. And what my family lacked the least was master teachers. The candles in the study would burn until the third watch of the night, with Guju Yuan and my grandfather engaging in strategic maneuvers on the sand table, conquering battlefields. Guju Yuan grew visibly more composed and wise. But my grandfather seemed to grow older day by day. It was as if he was straining every muscle to support something. Sometimes I felt sorry for my grandfather's old age and forbade them from burning the oil lamp any longer. Guju Yuan looked at me apologetically, but my grandfather smiled and said it was no trouble. The evening breeze of early summer was still a bit chilly, and I wasn't sure if I had heard a sigh. "I wonder how much longer I can stay with you," he said. That year, I was 15. There were only 7 months left until the disaster of the previous life, when our family was exiled. That day, I emerged from the Buddhist hall, and the female physician hurriedly sought me out. "Lady Lin is not well. She is currently being kept alive with strong medicine. The 5th prince is nowhere to be found. Miss Song, would you like to go and see her?" I immediately instructed my personal maid to send word and set off for the Qixia Palace. Since her severe illness in winter, she had been clinging to life for nearly half a year. But when I saw her again this time, her eyes were unusually clear. "You are the granddaughter of the loyal and brave Marquis Ruosi?" She gently reached out and stroked my cheek. "You look just like your mother." Only then did I realize that my mother, Lady Lin, and Aunt Lan Ting had once been close friends. And suddenly, I understood why. Despite years of disfavor, the mother and son in Qixia Palace had managed to survive. Why? Despite my connection to Qixia Palace, not a single whisper had ever reached me. Your mother and I both loved martial arts, but Lan Ting was a military strategist. After I entered the palace, your mother followed your father to guard the borders. You have no idea how envious I was of her. But later, my family achieved many military merits, and the emperor treated me very well. I thought, with such a good husband by my side, I was already very fortunate. But I never imagined that the imperial family is so fickle, and men are even more ruthless. He knew that the astrologer's predictions were merely a plot to frame me. Yet he still used this as an excuse to punish my family. The woman on the bed stared into the distance, as if she had returned to the past, reliving all her love and hatred once more. But the tone she used, as if entrusting her final wishes, sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't say a word, only clutching her hand tightly. "Things will get better, Your Majesty. The 5th prince is becoming more and more ambitious. I believe that with just one opportunity, he will." Lin Fei interrupted me with a bitter smile. "It is I who have dragged him down." I froze. Footsteps sounded behind us. A young man rushed in, looking weary from his journey. Lin Fei looked at Guju Yuan and said gently, "I was selfish. I dared not tell you that it was actually I who dragged you down. You always thought you were born unlucky and brought misfortune upon me. In truth, it was all my fault." Guju Yuan said nothing, kneeling before her bed with a thud. I had never seen him look so disoriented. Lin Fei reached out and stroked his head, smiling. "My son, you should have had a bright future. But instead you've spent 17 years with me in this cold palace. It's my fault for choosing the wrong man, and my fault for being powerless in palace intrigues. I had a youth full of promise, but my son didn't." Her smile gradually turned into tears, but she grabbed my hand. It was the pleading gesture of a mother. "Ruosi, Song girl, I have been ill for years. But I know you are a kind-hearted girl. My son has no one to rely on. If you take care of him, I will repay you even from the afterlife." A tear slid down her withered cheek. Her gaze grew unfocused. But she stubbornly refused to close her eyes. I held her hand tightly and repeated, "I will. I promise." Early summer. Lotus buds peek through the water. Qixia Palace once welcomed a female general. She had once ruled vast frontiers and wielded sharp swords and spears. She was a daughter of the steppes, free to roam on horseback. Yet she had been trapped in palace intrigues for years. She had lost everything, leaving behind only a stubborn child. That child is now 17, with shoulders as straight as newly sprouted bamboo. But when he closed his mother's eyes, he was as somber as a sword forged 1,000 times. Not a single tear fell from his eyes. I cried for him over and over again. Finally, he embraced me and whispered, "Don't cry." That was our first embrace. Yet it felt as though it had happened 1,000 times before. And I never truly saw the pain hidden beneath his suppressed breath. After Lin Fei's death, Gu Zhuyuan became even more dedicated to his studies. Even his grandfather asked me to him. Looking at his bloodshot eyes, I could only say, "Take care of yourself." He just smiled and urged me to remember to add more clothes as the weather grew colder. Thus, from summer to autumn, he studied and trained with a life-or-death determination. Only when he saw me would he pretend to doze off for a moment. Gu Zhuyuan was utterly exhausted. He pretended to sleep, but he truly fell asleep. I sat beside him, fanning him, my heart filled with bitterness. Even in his dreams, his expression was restless. His hands were clenched tightly, as if he were struggling with someone. I gently reached out to hold his hand, but he startled awake, his expression fierce, and he roughly pushed me to the ground. His fist struck like lightning, but when he realized it was me, he forced himself to shift his blow, shattering the bricks instead. His hands were covered in blood. But he paid no heed, rushing to check on me. "Miss Song, I'm sorry." I applied medicine to his wounds and sighed. "You're worrying too much. I'm afraid you'll drive yourself mad." He lowered his eyelashes. "As long as you're here, I won't go mad. And I dare not go mad." I froze. He whispered, "When I met you, all my pride was gone. You once asked me what I would do if my mother passed away. At that time, I thought I would just follow her." I immediately said, "No." He looked at me and smiled, saying, "You saved me." A young man confined to the depths of the palace for years had lost all his sharpness in the endless waiting. Under the endless suffering and oppression, the only thing keeping him alive was his sick mother on the bed. When his mother was on the brink of death, he knelt in the snow to seek a doctor. He heard the sound of sutras from the Buddhist hall and caught a whiff of sandalwood incense. In despair, he thought, "Bodhisattva, if you can see me, I will trade my life for yours." He did not wait for the Bodhisattva. Instead, he waited for a girl. Her eyes sparkled with sincere trust and affection. She paved the way for him and made plans for him. He did not know where this love came from, but because of her sincerity, he reignited his hope. On the day of the first snow, the weather was bitterly cold. The fifth prince, who had been exiled to the cold palace, was reborn. As the long day came to an end, the sky was filled with a glow. Gu Zhuyuan stood in the light of the setting sun, his dark eyes reflecting my image. He seemed to have 1,000 words to say. But in the end, he only uttered one resolute sentence. "Miss Song, for you, I would brave even the fiercest battles." The fragrance of golden osmanthus filled the air. The Empress Dowager's birthday was approaching. Various rare treasures were presented. But the Empress Dowager was particularly fond of my gift. It was an ancient text from the library of the Shuangwen temple. It contained Buddhist verses and descriptions of celestial phenomena. The most important line was not a scripture but a prophecy. A white rainbow pierces the sun, a hero is born. If that were all, it would not be significant. On the 19th day of the second month, the birthday of Guanyin Bodhisattva, I obtained an auspicious fortune slip for the Empress Dowager. This slip, along with the ancient text, became the gift for the Empress Dowager's 60th birthday. The fortune slip read, "In the east, the moon shines brightly, but clouds quickly cover half of it. Do not say that when it is full. It will become incomplete, it must return to fullness from its incompleteness." The Empress Dowager pondered for a long time and said, "The moon being incomplete and then becoming full seems as though it is about to rescue someone." Aunt Lan Ting thought for a moment and said, "All the princes in the palace have their mothers to care for them, none of them are like the moon being incomplete. If we talk about the moon being incomplete and then becoming full, it seems to refer to the one in Chisha Palace." The Empress nodded. "That child's mother is the second daughter of General Lin, isn't she? She was also a general in the past." Lady Lanting replied, "Now that I think about it, she was always respectful and humble, living in seclusion in the cold palace, never uttering a single word of complaint. That day, she asked me if I could trade my life for her mother's, which was truly filial and kind." The Empress Dowager rubbed her temples and sighed. "Perhaps it's because I'm getting old, but I increasingly hope for harmony among my descendants. That child is truly pitiful, having lost his mother and now without any support." Lady Lanting added, "The fifth prince now has only you to rely on. Recently, the emperor's health has been poor, and the position of crown prince remains undecided. The court and the harem are filled with intrigue and deception. Concubines and princes are taking turns to test the waters, using the Empress Dowager's birthday as an excuse to seek her support. But the Empress Dowager has never been one to add flowers to an already beautiful scene. She prefers to offer help when it is most needed. One family holds absolute power. In the Buddhist hall, besides me, there was also Guju Yuan. I continued to recite the Sutra of the Lotus Flower. The Empress Dowager, however, held a list of officials and read each name to Guju Yuan. Guju Yuan listened with reverence and humility, and after receiving her instructions, served her with medicine, behaving like a true filial grandson. On the day of her birthday, the Empress Dowager led Guju Yuan to sit on the seat of honor. The entire hall was in an uproar, but the emperor silently approved. I watched Guju Yuan interact with others with great poise. I also watched him perform a sword dance to celebrate the Empress Dowager's birthday. His movements as smooth as flowing water. The young man was exceptionally handsome. His swordplay graceful like dancing. Every movement exuding natural heroic spirit. I had known all along, he was a long sword hidden in its scabbard for years. Once exposed to the light of day, he would surely roar like a dragon, shaking the heavens. The Empress Dowager looked at him with great satisfaction. The emperor even asked him to present his strategies in court. He was eloquent and strategic, speaking fluently on the spot. Guju Yuan answered with ease, causing the emperor to nod in approval repeatedly. Whether they were noble ladies or young nobles, all eyes were on him. I could even hear whispers among the crowd. Is that the fifth prince? How come I've never seen him before? His appearance is too striking, one can imagine the beauty of Lady Lin when she was alive. Shoo! Don't let the ninth princess hear that, their mothers were sworn enemies. The ninth princess, dressed in pale yellow, sat on the right. Her expression displeased. The arrogance in her eyes and brows was identical to her previous life. This was the first time I had seen her in this life. After I entered the palace to recite Buddhist scriptures for the Empress Dowager, she had invited me several times to admire flowers and drink tea. I had politely declined each time. The pain she had caused me in my previous life was too deep, I feared that seeing her again would overwhelm me with hatred. Despite my careful preparations, seeing her today still left me feeling short of breath. Taking advantage of the moment when no one was paying attention to me, I quietly slipped out to get some fresh air. As I turned into the garden, I encountered Pei Shu. He was still dressed in moon-white robes, calm and handsome. Upon seeing him, I wanted to hide. But he called out to me, "Ruo-ci, I have something to tell you." By the clear water, the flowers bloomed vibrantly. Yet the young man's face was pale. "We've been childhood sweethearts since we were young. I took your kindness for granted and never considered that you might have other choices. That was my greatest mistake, wasn't it? In this life and the last." I finally heard Pei Shu's true feelings. Before my rebirth, because of him, I endured humiliation and torment. The 9th princess issued an edict banishing me to a dilapidated temple. I had to endure the biting cold of winter, fetching icy water to clean the Buddha statues. My hands were covered in frostbite, oozing pus. No longer the delicate hands of the noble lady who once played the zither with unmatched skill in the capital. The 9th princess still refused to spare me. On my birthday, she came to the dilapidated temple. She lowered a curtain and ordered me to play Buddhist music for a nobleman. The qin was specially made, each string cut into my fingers. By the end of the piece, I was covered in blood. The wind lifted a corner of the curtain, and I saw clearly. The nobleman listening to my music was none other than Pei Shu. Pei Lang. We were childhood sweethearts, learning the zither together and studying together. You couldn't have failed to recognize my playing, or to hear my pain-filled sobs, or to forget that it was my 16th birthday. Yet when the 9th princess asked you how the music sounded, you merely replied, "Not as good as the princesses." You made me the most ridiculous girl in the world. And now I finally know what you were thinking. It turns out that my kindness toward you became the reason you could discard me so easily. I wanted to laugh, but somehow, my eyes welled up with tears. Pei Shu didn't notice. He said, "Ruo-ci, we were childhood sweethearts, we should be a perfect match." I now realize I was wrong. I will change. Ruo-ci, I only said, we were merely childhood playmates. There is no need for you to change for me. Mr. Pei, please leave. He froze, unable to believe what I had said, and reached out to grab my hand. "What did you say?" As we struggled, the jade bracelet on my wrist fell and shattered. He froze. I knelt down to pick it up and whispered, "This was the birthday gift you gave me when I was 14. Pei Shu stammered, "Ruo-ci, I didn't mean to." I gathered the broken pieces in my palm and smiled. "Since the bracelet is broken, our connection is severed. Mr. Pei, please do not pursue me further." He was both shocked and angry, reaching out to pull me back. "If one is broken, I can give you 10 or 100 more. Song Ruo-ci, why are you treating me this way?" He asked sincerely, and I replied honestly. I concealed my past lives and present existence, only saying that I had once had a great dream. In the dream, my grandfather was falsely accused, and my grandmother fell seriously ill. No one in the capital dared to treat my family's illness, so I had no choice but to seek help from my betrothed. But he told me, "Ruo-ci, times have changed. I cannot have any further connection with your family." When the princess fell deeply in love with him, he hurriedly cancelled our engagement. Later, I played the zither in a dilapidated temple, bleeding profusely. After that, my petition to the emperor was rejected, and I returned home in disgrace. Later, I was brutally killed in the temple. Yet the Pei family celebrated with lanterns and decorations. The second son of the Pei family was to marry the princess. My life was the dowry he gave her. Pei Shu froze and finally protested. That was just your dream. I laughed. But the ninth princess truly fell in love with you at first sight. Didn't she? Rumors spread through the streets and alleys that the ninth princess had fallen into the Baishur River. It was the fine young man from the Pei family who swam to save her. From then on, carriages frequently came and went from the Pei mansion. The ninth princess, under the pretext of seeking a Pei family maiden to admire flowers, was actually admiring someone else. Pei family gentleman, you desire a Huang and Nuying by your side. But I refuse to enter your chessboard. Pei Shu's face turned ashen. He grabbed me, trying to explain. It's not like that. Ruosi. Earlier, when the bracelet shattered, it had cut my wrist. Pei Shu had pulled at my wound, causing me to feel a sharp pain that made me want to cry. Let go of me. A tall figure emerged from behind, pushing him to the ground with a single hand. Guju Yuan shielded me behind him, looking down at Pei Shu with a cold expression. Song girl told you to get out of here. Can't you hear her? Pei Shu walked away, looking dazed and defeated. I wiped away my tears in panic, mocking myself. Am I being ridiculous? But I heard him say, Miss Song has always been sincere with others. That's good. You're brave. He doesn't deserve you. He pulled my wrist toward him. The wound, which Pei Shu hadn't seen, was clearly visible to him. Guju Yuan took a handkerchief and carefully wiped it clean, then wrapped it gently. Then he prized open my palm and threw all the broken jade onto the ground. The jade is broken, it's useless now. A jade bracelet made of sheep's fat jade fell into my palm. Get a new one is better. During the few months he lived in the Zongyang, Guju Yuan obtained a piece of good jade. He had little free time, so he would carve it by lamplight at night. He was a novice and unskilled at carving, his hands covered in scars. His grandfather saw this and suggested taking it to a master carver at the jade shop. But Guju Yuan said he wanted to give it to someone, and carving it himself would show his sincerity. I thought he was going to give it to Lady Lin. But instead, he gave it to me. The bracelet was light, yet it felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. It pressed down on my heart, making me feel so heavy I was about to cry. I originally planned to give it to you on your birthday, but I didn't want to see you sad. I stubbornly replied, I'm not sad. Guju Yuan smiled slowly. Yes, you're not sad. It's me who's sad. The usually cold and stern young man was showing signs of worry and distress for the first time. When you're sad, I'm even sadder. Song girl, am I sick? I stared at him in shock. What did you say? He gazed at me with gentle eyes. Song girl, I said, I am deeply in love with you. Shortly after the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, the chief astrologer was imprisoned for incompetence. On his first day in office, the new chief astrologer solemnly declared that the interpretation of a celestial phenomenon 17 years ago had been incorrect. A white rainbow piercing the sun signified the emergence of a heroic figure. Now it was time to set things right and announce it to the world. Everyone knew what the chief astrologer's declaration meant. The seating arrangements at the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet also reached the ears of various families. Qixia Palace was newly decorated, and a steady stream of precious treasures was sent into the palace. However, the master of Qixia Palace did not care about those things. He still preferred to frequent the residence of the loyal and brave marquis. That year, I was 15. There was only 1 month left until the upheaval of my previous family. I became somewhat neurotic, often having nightmares at night. In the middle of the night, I would wake up and run to my grandparents' room to make sure they were sleeping soundly. One day, I woke up from a dream to find the window pitch black. The night lamp had been blown out by the wind at some point. It felt as though I were in a dilapidated temple. I didn't even have time to put on my shoes. I rolled out of bed and stumbled through the long corridor. The wind howled, and the night rain was cold. The corridor seemed endless, and I couldn't find my grandparents' courtyard. I was shivering from the cold, but my voice was stuck in my throat, and I couldn't even make a sound. A pair of hands reached out from behind me and held me tightly. I looked up in panic and saw Guju Yuan's pained expression. Ruosi. What's wrong? I clung tightly to his collar. Speaking incoherently, my grandfather and grandmother are gone. Guju Yuan. Go save them. You. The courtyard lights flickered on. My grandfather's attendant asked. Miss. Has something happened? From further away, I heard my grandmother's voice, Ruosi. What's wrong? I snapped back to reality. They were all safe and sound. Was it just another dream? My body went limp, and I couldn't speak. Guju Yuan answered for me. It's nothing. Just a nightmare. In the study, the candlelight flickered dimly. I couldn't stop trembling. So Guju Yuan took off his fox fur robe and wrapped it around me. Your maid said you've been sleeping restlessly lately. So I came to check on you. As I suspected. He furrowed his brows and looked down at me, Ruosi. Is something troubling you? I thought for a moment but still didn't tell him about my past life. He wouldn't believe me anyway. I only asked him to keep an eye on the political intrigues at court and be extra cautious if any news unfavorable to my grandfather arises. My grandfather fought on the battlefield in his youth, risking his life for provisions and his men, and offended many people. Now that he is old, his sons are all buried at the frontiers, and I only wish for him to have a peaceful old age. Guju Yuan looked at me for a long time, so long that I dared not meet his gaze. Finally, he replied, all right. That night, he stayed by my bedside. I fell asleep quickly. Rarely did I have nightmares that night. In my dream, the sun was shining brightly. My grandmother held my hand and took me out for a spring outing. My grandfather picked me up and placed me on his horse, laughing heartily. My granddaughter, you will learn to walk on horseback. His hands were strong and calloused, having once held a blood-stained sword, yet they had also cradled my carefree childhood. I couldn't help but grip his hand tighter and tighter. This way. He wouldn't leave. Don't leave me. In the long night, a single lamp burned. It cast the shadow of a lone figure sitting by the bed. He lowered his eyes to the hand he was holding tightly. His gaze as dark as ink. Days passed one after another. I suddenly realized that the words of the maidservants and the dishes prepared in the kitchen seemed identical to those of my previous life. I divined the future every day. But every omen pointed to despair. And every sign was the worst possible outcome. I was so worried that I couldn't eat or sleep. I asked the Empress Dowager for leave, claiming illness. It wasn't entirely a lie. In recent days, I had grown so thin that I was unrecognizable. My grandfather and grandmother summoned renowned physicians from all over. They all said that the illness of a noble lady was a disease of the heart. A disease of the heart has no cure. My grandmother was so anxious she was about to cry. She asked me, Ruosi, what is troubling you? I could only hold her hand. It was warm, and her pulse was steady. Then I could breathe and smile. I am not troubled. With you all here, I am not troubled. But at night, I couldn't sleep. So I went to look for them. I saw my grandmother kneeling in the Buddhist altar, pleading to the Bodhisattva, if my husband and I are destined to die, please protect Rusi so that she will live a healthy and worry-free life. Behind her, my grandfather, who had never believed in gods or Buddhas, also knelt down and bowed his head repeatedly. I know I have committed too many sins in this life. If retribution must come, let it fall on me alone. Do not involve my granddaughter. I was struck speechless. On that night of the first snow, the cold was biting. In the 3rd month of spring, was I the only one who had such a bone-chilling dream? Guju Yuan had not come to find me for a long time. I heard that the emperor intended to arrange a marriage for him, bestowing upon him a princess of a different surname, the daughter of a meritorious official, who held immense power in the northwest. Everyone knew this was an excellent match. Once the marriage was consummated, Gu Zhuyuan would become the crown prince. And none of this had anything to do with me. My relationship with Gu Zhuyuan has always been one of repayment. Now that he has fulfilled his lifelong wish, I have fulfilled my promise from a previous life. This year, I am 16. In 3 days, it will be the day of the upheaval in my previous life. Despite my worries and anxieties, my heart is as calm as water. I pick up my brush and write a letter, which will be delivered to Gu Zhuyuan after my death, to be opened by His Highness. When I was young, I was unruly, laughed before the Buddha, and did not believe in reincarnation. Later, karma caught up with me, and I suffered endless humiliation. Struggling in the mud with no hope of survival, someone loved me deeply. Yet on that day, he married another woman in a grand procession. Someone I had never met before came riding 1,000 miles to find me. Your Highness, you say you don't know why I'm helping you. In truth, I don't know either. Why did that person come to help me in that dilapidated temple? My questions will never be answered. But I don't want you to end up like me. Your Highness, Sangruosi of the Bodhi cottage is not as pure and virtuous as she seems. She helps you because you once helped her. Your Highness, the land is lush and beautiful, and your future is bright. May you be well and may there be peace for all generations. After finishing the last stroke, I sealed it with wax. I handed it to Aunt Lan Ting, but she asked me, "Have you thought this through?" I did not answer, but instead bowed deeply to her. The nights in the palace are long. If Ruosi can be under your care, it will be my great fortune. She touched my cheek and whispered, "You are so much like your mother." The final day, court officials arrived, and my grandfather was summoned to the palace. Before leaving, he looked at me deeply but said nothing. 4 hours passed, and he still hadn't returned. It was exactly the same as in my previous life. I consulted the oracle, but it was still a death omen, the worst possible sign. Heaven was out to destroy me. The sky grew dark, black clouds rolled in, and the city was filled with oppression. I stood in the Buddha hall, neither kneeling nor bowing, but wanting to laugh. In this life, I had come back once more, having calculated everything. The traitors in the army had already been captured and executed. The so-called evidence of treason had been burned to ashes. But it still couldn't defy the arrangements of fate. On the same day of my past and present lives, even the weather, the time, and the eunuch were the same. The same edict was read, ordering my grandfather to enter the palace immediately, without delay. I no longer struggled, dressed properly, and went to find my grandfather and grandmother. Poison was hidden between my fingers, and a dagger was tucked into my sleeve. If I had done everything I could and still couldn't escape fate's arrangement, then I would die before being humiliated, using my life as a futile resistance against the inevitable. But my grandmother grabbed my hand and told me to change into coarse hemp clothing. She pushed me into a donkey cart and said seriously, "To the southwest lies our ancestral home. North of the ancestral home, under the 9th tree, there is a box of gold buried there. Go find a man surnamed Guan, he is the son of your wet nurse. He will protect you and give you a stable life." I shook my head violently. "No. I won't go." My grandmother pushed me forcefully. "Rusi, don't be foolish. You must go." In the struggle, the dagger fell from my sleeve. My grandmother froze, bent down to pick up the dagger, and seemed to understand something instantly, tears streaming down her face. I clutched her hand tightly, speaking each word clearly. "Grandmother, the Zongyang is a family of proud warriors. Your granddaughter refuses to be a coward. If fate cannot be changed, I will fight to the death. At the first hour of the evening, dark clouds gathered. My grandfather still hadn't returned. A palace attendant arrived, announcing the emperor's decree. He ordered my grandmother and me to enter the palace, or else the imperial guards outside the Zongyang would burn down the gates immediately. The eunuch smiled without any warmth. Please come with us. I stepped forward, ignoring him, and grabbed a young eunuch. I pulled off his hat and pulled out his hairpin. She looked panicked for a moment. She was clearly the 9th princess. The entire hall erupted in chaos. The 9th princess instinctively tried to fight back, but I pushed her to the ground. I stomped on her again, leaving her unable to move. The eunuchs stirred, all trying to stop me. My bodyguards formed a line in front of me, as solid as an iron barrel, impervious to swords and spears. The lead eunuch looked nervously at the 9th princess, then coldly asked me, "Miss Song, what are you doing? A noble lady of the palace is not someone you can bully." I pressed my foot harder onto her chest and spoke slowly. "Today, I will humiliate you." The 9th princess screamed under my foot. "Song Ruosi, I will have you sliced into 1,000 pieces." I lowered my head, locking eyes with the same cruel gaze from my past life, and finally smiled. "9th princess, I await your 1,000 cuts." A eunuch in the corner saw the situation was bad and tried to slip away to inform the imperial guards. My grandmother gave a signal, and the guards kicked him to the ground and arrested him on the spot. The head eunuch shouted angrily, "Are you trying to rebel?" My grandmother rose slowly and said coldly, "An illegitimate ruler, what's the point of rebelling?" I also said, "Zheng Gonggong. Last winter, we met by Yufei's side. Don't you remember?" The eunuch's eyes flickered. "Still trying to intimidate us, what Yufei?" "I am following the emperor's orders. You are disobeying the imperial decree. Wait for the imperial family to punish you." Saying this, he tried to pull the 9th princess away. "Try to run? In your dreams." The dagger slid out of my sleeve and landed in my palm. I grabbed the 9th princess and pulled her up, holding the dagger against her neck. "Did you come here to mock me? Have you ever considered that if someone is willing to sacrifice their own life, they will never be a laughingstock?" She gasped. "Song Ruosi, Pei Lang thought you were a divine lady, but you're just a madwoman. He should have come to see your true face." Pei Lang. Always Pei Lang. Was it not enough that he humiliated me in my previous life? Now he wants to shame me again in this life under the same pretext? I pressed the dagger an inch deeper into her neck, and blood seeped out instantly. The 9th princess dared not speak another word, her legs trembling with fear. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted from the doorway, growing louder by the second. Within moments, a blinding flash of fire erupted, illuminating half the sky. Grandmother sprang to her feet. The 9th princess burst into laughter. "Song Ruosi, you're finished. My brother and mother must have come looking for me after I didn't return. Song Ruosi, I will cut your flesh inch by inch. Hang your head on the city gate for everyone to spit on. And I will." Smack! The grandmother slapped her across the face. The slap was delivered with all her strength, and the 9th princess's face swelled up instantly, with a trickle of blood flowing from the corner of her lips. "You dare hit me? Do you know that my brother is about to inherit the throne? I will be the second most powerful person in the kingdom." Smack! Another slap. The grandmother flexed her wrist and said kindly, "I'm hitting you because you're a filthy, good-for-nothing creature." She beckoned, and the well-trained maid stuffed a cloth into the 9th princess's mouth. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes bulged, and she looked like a madwoman, held tightly by the strong maidservants, unable to move. The sounds of fighting outside grew louder. It was the imperial guards and the palace guards engaged in a fierce battle. In the distance, one could still hear the desperate cries of someone near death. The palace guards had all followed my grandfather, uncle, and father through countless battles on the battlefield. They did not die defending the country and the people. Must they now die in this palace coup? What difference is there between their lives and mine? My grandmother and I exchanged glances, understanding each other's thoughts. We spoke in unison. Open the gates! The guards and bodyguards tried their best to stop us. Everyone in the mansion is willing to risk their lives to protect the master. Lady, please do not risk your life. Yes, lady, we can still fight. We are willing to die for our lord. Torches illuminated the familiar, resolute faces. The sounds of battle raged outside the gates, and comrades could fall at any moment. There were tens of thousands of imperial troops, but only hundreds of personal guards. It was a futile endeavor, a military blunder. The old lady surveyed the scene one last time, her words ringing out clearly. It is precisely because you are willing to risk your lives for me that I cannot allow you to die for me. The loyal and brave mansion has always led the way in battle. The mansion gates suddenly swung open. The sounds of battle at the entrance paused. The old lady, accompanied by her young granddaughter, dressed in battle armor and wielding a long sword, stood at the entrance. I heard someone was looking for me, so I came. Blood and fire cast an orange glow on her white hair, but she stood tall and composed, her smile unwavering. I am an old woman past my prime. I am not worth all this trouble. Where is the commander of the Imperial Guards? Lead the way. The area fell silent. A horse approached and stopped nearby. The man's face looked familiar. He spoke first. Where is Xiao? It was him, the younger brother of Yufei and the uncle of the ninth princess. From inside the gate came the shrill cries of the ninth princess, "Uncle!" The guards bound her tightly and threw her out the door. She couldn't move and could only scream, "Uncle! They're bullying me! You must avenge me! In my previous life, I went to the drum of justice to appeal for my grandparents' innocence. Instead of the emperor's eunuch, I was met by the ninth princess. The look she gave me was as cold as death. You are Song Ruosi?" Her tone was mocking. The renowned flame before the Buddha of the capital. The fiancé of Pei Lang, and this is all you are? I continued to plead humbly. Please, princess, speak on my behalf. My grandfather had no intention of rebelling. Please let the emperor see the truth. The ninth princess laughed derisively. With your status, you dare to ask to see the emperor? Do you think you're worthy? She ordered her men to drag me away and told me to return to my dilapidated temple. Along the way, I had to wear shackles and be paraded through the streets like a criminal, though I had no idea what crime I had committed. Compared to the humiliation I endured then, what did the ninth princess suffer? However, General, you did not think so. He glanced at the ninth princess, then looked at us with a dark expression. Seize them! The surrounding guards and bodyguards fought desperately but could not hold them back. The ninth princess laughed triumphantly. Song Ruosi, I told you long ago that the day the heavens change will be your day of death. She broke free from those supporting her, clutched the hairpin, and walked toward me. The cold, sharp tip of the hairpin glided across my face. Her gaze was like that of a venomous snake. Song Ruosi, how did you manage to make Pei Lang so infatuated with you? He rejected me and refuses to see me again. Tell me, if your face were disfigured and ugly, would Pei Lang still be so devoted to you? I smiled. You won't win. She froze. What did you say? The flames engulfed half the city, illuminating the night like daytime. Dying tonight is much warmer than before. This place is perfect. I repeated. You won't win. A poisonous pill was lodged between my teeth. My last hope for tonight. I have said it before, even if I die, I will die before fate has its way. Fine. Fine. At this point, you're still putting on a show. Then I'll show you who will win. I'll slash your face to pieces. Expose your body to the wilderness. And let the whole world see that even those who burn before the Buddha are nothing but ordinary mortals. The ninth princess was suddenly enraged by my words, grabbed my chin, and raised her hairpin high. Whoosh! An arrow pierced the air. It shattered the hairpin. I suddenly opened my eyes and looked up. At the end of the road, the sound of hooves echoed, and countless soldiers surged forward. At the forefront, Yuen rode alone to meet the enemy. The flames illuminated his body, but they couldn't illuminate his cold killing intent. I saw him draw his bow. I saw him pull the string. I saw the arrow pierce the ninth princess's skull, its white feathers still trembling. A spurt of blood splattered onto my cheek, and the ninth princess's lifeless body fell heavily at my feet. The sounds of battle erupted again. The general charged forward as if unopposed, his black boots splattering blood. Yuen reached out and picked me up. I came too late, he said hoarsely. In that moment, I couldn't distinguish between past and present. In a past life, someone had once held me tenderly in their arms and said, I came too late. In this life, this man held me tightly, his voice trembling with fear. I had a very long dream. In the imperial garden, he had once been a little eavesdropper. He heard his beloved girl weeping bitterly, saying she had awakened from a great dream, abandoned by all, only to find emptiness. In the long corridor of the at midnight, he held the despairing girl in his arms, listening to her trembling questions about the safety of her grandparents. He was once puzzled, this girl, born into nobility and having lived a life of ease. How could she have so much suffering? It was not until a few nights ago, when he overheard her dream talk, that he finally decided to take the initiative. He obtained irrefutable evidence, discovering the fourth prince's treasonous intentions. He remained inactive, but in reality, he had stepped back into the shadows, planning to stage a play to solidify the prince's guilt. That day, when he returned to the palace, the moon was already high in the sky. He received a letter from Lady Lanting. I was supposed to give this to you in a few days, but I decided to break my promise. The words in the letter were gentle and sincere, as if he could hear the young woman's soft laughter, but it only made him more confused. She said he had helped her first, but in his mind, the day they first met was when it snowed heavily in the Buddha hall. He lay awake at night, filled with doubts, and eventually drifted into a shallow sleep. In his dream, he was still the lonely fifth prince of Qishao Palace, unable to move, merely an observer. Through his own eyes, he witnessed the rise and fall of the capital city, and everything he saw seemed to align perfectly with the great dream the girl had mentioned. He saw her feverishly searching for medicine for her grandmother despite her high fever. He saw her being avoided by her fiancé, and saw her standing in the rain, exhausted and emaciated. He saw her wiping a Buddha statue in a dilapidated temple and falling from a great height. He wanted to reach out and help her, but he couldn't move. He saw her playing the zither behind a curtain, her hands covered in blood. His heart ached so much he wanted to scream. He strained every muscle, trying to break through the invisible barrier to embrace the girl he loved. But he was just a bystander. He was trapped in a dream, with no control over his actions. On the final day, he saw the Pei mansion adorned with lanterns and decorations, preparing to marry the ninth princess. The couple paid homage to heaven and earth, then plotted to take the girl's life. The traditional 3 mediators and 6 gifts were deemed insufficient. Their wedding night would be marked by the blood of an innocent soul. He felt an unprecedented rage and chaos, repeatedly questioning the heavens why they had treated his beloved so cruelly. That girl was an exceptionally good girl. She deserved to meet an exceptionally good man and live an exceptionally good life. Why treat her this way? He was a hero as brilliant as a white rainbow, and he was about to tear his heart out. He finally took control of his dream. He took a swift horse, pounded on several city gates, and rushed toward the dilapidated temple on the outskirts of the city. It was the first snowfall of the season, and the cold was biting. He had to save his beloved. He only regretted that he had not been born with wings. But then, the young general lowered his head in pain, unable to continue. I stepped forward and gently embraced him. I know what happened afterward. In the dilapidated temple on the outskirts of the city, I lay on a straw mat, bleeding from 7 orifices, weeping before the dust-covered statue of Guanyin. Guanyin remained silent, gazing at me with compassion. The sound of urgent horse hoofs echoed outside the door. Someone, shivering with cold, approached me. My eyes were already blind, and I gazed helplessly in his direction, pleading hoarsely, "No matter who you are, please bury me. In my next life, I will surely repay you." He trembled as he held me in his arms, and a hot tear fell onto my forehead. On that night of the first snow, the cold was biting. The first time Guju Yuan came to save me, our bond was already deep and profound. Years later, during a snowstorm at the Buddhist temple, when I saw Guju Yuan again, he was my savior. In this life and the last, a bodhisattva looked down with compassion, enduring the suffering of the world. The bond between me and Guju Yuan was like fishtails intertwined, yin and yang, interdependent. A single thought gave rise to enlightenment. Later, the annals recorded the events with meticulous detail. Yet with just a few strokes, they sealed the fate of this tragedy. The 4th prince, Jiuzhen, was disloyal and unfilial, colluding with his maternal clan to rebel, leading the imperial guards to besiege the city, intending to force the emperor to abdicate. Fortunately, the 5th prince, Zhou Yuan, summoned the loyal troops of the former loyal and brave marquis from the northwest, and divine troops descended from the heavens to protect the imperial capital. In this battle, Guju Yuan was granted the title of crown prince. Yu Fei and the 4th prince were executed, and the entire Yu clan was beheaded. Later, it was discovered that the Pei family had been closely associated with the 9th princess, who had died in the chaos of war, and also harbored treasonous intentions. Out of mercy, the emperor spared them, exiling the entire family. Pei Shu's exile route passed through the loyal and brave marquis's mansion. That day, I was drinking tea and admiring flowers with my grandparents. A piercing scream came from outside the door. He said, "Ruosi, whether you believe me or not, I truly love you." Looking back, 10 years have passed like a dream, and every event seems to have fulfilled that prophecy. Watching, I did not utter a word, only turning the Bodhi beads on my wrist. That was the gift Guju Yuan gave me for my 16th birthday. Despite his busy official duties, he carved it by hand. Where the Bodhi passes, the altar is pure and clear. He said, "Rusi, as long as I am here, you may sit in the Buddha hall and never worry again." This year, I am 16, and I did not die in the snowstorm. My grandparents are still by my side. The eunuch brought the Empress Dowager's edict. It stated that song girl of the loyal and brave mansion, during the upheaval, acted with great righteousness, willing to die to protect the imperial lineage. She is loyal and filial, worthy to be the prince's bride, and thus, she is to be married to the prince. This was the Empress Dowager's gift to me on my 16th birthday. Behind the eunuch, someone plucked willow branches and asked about flowers, approaching me and holding my hand with great care. A pair of pitch-black eyes fixed on me, revealing layers upon layers of unbreakable cycles. The world is filled with countless causes and effects, but true love is connected by a single thread. We despaired in the wind and snow, yet it was also in the wind and snow that we found salvation. The wind and snow have dispersed. and the sun warms the flowers. Guanyin lowers her brows, unconcerned with the affairs of the world.